Hello and welcome to the Millicent Rogers Museum, first in our series of Millicent Unplugged. This is a virtual panel discussion series that the museum is sponsoring, inviting artists to have relevant and informal conversations about culture and art and the intersections that we see. So tonight we are going to be talking about Dia de los Muertos, and the topic is sugar skulls, marigolds, sugar skulls, saints, and marigolds, excuse me. And so we have with us Anita Rodriguez, and she is a renowned artist and author. We are very happy to welcome Anita, also a community activist, artist and potter Stephen Kilborn, and religious iconographer and artist Father William Hart. And Sara Frances is joining us as the moderator, and we're so happy to have everybody here this evening. For the audience, for our panel discussion, if you'd like to use the chat feature at the end of about 45 minutes, we'll have some Q&A. Sara.
Well, hi, everybody. Introducing myself is that Karen and I are sharing the responsibility for bringing you just extraordinary artists, community people, and all kinds of topics that we want to discuss with you, the honored listeners. And I am disguised, of course, for the moment. And just about myself, I am a photographer by trade, and the pictures you see behind me are from San Miguel de Allende. My entire experience with Days of the Dead is from Mexico. But what I want to show you to start is to change. Whoa, and my light just went out, and I want to say, well, the first thing about Days of the Dead is that people naturally, if they're not of our mixed heritage, they think it's equivalent to Halloween. And so here I have wonderful jack-o'-lanterns, but indeed it is not Halloween. And actually, Dias de los Muertos are 2 days. And I want to switch over immediately to have Father Bill tell us about the Catholic All Saints and All Souls days, because that's part of where this all started. And so, Father Bill, take it away.
Okay, thank you. My last name is McNichols, by the way, everybody.
I'm sorry.
My middle name is Hart. But yeah, I had to do my homework, because I grew up like most people with Halloween, and then All Saints Day, and then All Souls Day. And I'll say a little bit about that. But the All Saints Day really comes, and I want to show this book. I hope everybody can see it. It's called The Cult of the Saints, The Rise and Function in Latin Christianity by Peter Brown. And it is an amazing book. I read it many, many years ago, and I love it. It's how really the veneration to the saints began. And the veneration for all saints began, of course, with the early Christian martyrs. And in this book, one of the bishops living in the 4th century said, everybody's forgotten the name of the politicians, the emperor, everybody else, but everybody knows the name of Saint Agnes. Everybody knows the Saint Tarcisius, Saint Pancratius, Saint Sebastian, all the early young martyrs and all the martyrs at that time. And it became, in the book, it said the cemeteries and the catacombs, which are underground cemeteries, those became places where people would go. And let's say you're visiting the tomb of the 11-year-old martyr, Saint Agnes, and you bring your child who's blind and you lay her on top of the tomb, and suddenly she's healed of blindness. So what this book says, it opened up from heaven down to earth, so the saints became known as the invisible friends. Like when we're children, we have invisible friends, but these these were people that would answer your prayers and that were next to you. And that really began the veneration. And then finally, I think around the 9th century, like 837, doing my homework today, Saint Odilo of Cluny, the monastery in Paris, Cluny, set a date for All Saints' Day, and it became November 1st. And All Souls' Day became the day after. And so I was thinking today, I was really thinking about, it was very big when I was a little kid. Like on All Souls' Day, we would go to church and say a certain number of prayers and you could get a soul out of purgatory. That was the whole thing. And I thought, why was it so big when I was little? Well, I was born in 1949. It was 4 years after the war ended. So during the World War I and World War II, All Souls' Day became huge because people had to live with so many deaths. And I think All Souls' Day is huge right now, bigger than probably it's ever been in our lifetime because of the so many thousands of people that have died of COVID. So the church on All Saints, on Halloween, which is, All Hallows Eve, people used to dress up as their favorite saint. And then it became, well, let's dress up as the devil or let's dress up as something else. And then, we've inherited that. And actually Halloween came from Samhain, which is a Celtic festival. And, the Celts had like 4 major festivals, but it came over here with when the Irish came here for after the famine. And so it landed in America Halloween, and that's the eve of All Saints' Day and then All Souls' Day.
Thank you, Father Bill. That's a great.
I hope that helped.
I didn't know about the saints and the Celts in any way, but now, Anita, your experience being a multilingualist in Spanish and English, you know more about how the 2 days now have become separated into the All Saints' Day is devoted to the children, the Inocentes, and that the second day we honoring everyone, all our ancestors, whoever has passed. So won't you say more about the Mexican tradition and how this has all come into the contemporary vernacular?
Well, actually, the origin of Day of the Dead is universal, and it predates the Catholic Church and the discovery of the Americas by nobody really knows how long. It's an indigenous day of celebration, and it is observed in all of the pueblos and all over the world, because that is the time of the year which the year dies, the harvest comes, the plants die. So it's universal. And in Mexico, it began with the pre-Columbian cult of Mictlantecuhtli Tantecuhtli, who is the androgynous ruler of the underworld, not to be confused with hell. And she has specialties. She gives you a good death and she protects you from violence. And she is a really powerful archetype in the psyche of the Mexican people, and has been for even the 500 years after the church came to Mexico. You can actually buy images of her now in the little stores next to the churches all over Mexico, because the Catholic Church simply had to accept her. And when the narco wars began, I was living in Mexico, and the violence was horrible. It made you remember the sacrifices. I mean, it was so brutal and grisly. And shrines to Mictlantecuhtli sprang up all over Mexico, all along the highways, all along, especially, of course, the drug routes, and people put statues of her in their windows. There were self-appointed bishops. There was a TV program devoted to her. There was a magazine, I still have a copy, with testimonials of how her devotees had been saved by Mictlantecuhtli. And so as she came down through history during the 500 years after the Catholic Church arrived on Turtle Island, her name changed. And in Mexico, her name is La Niña Blanca, La Madrina, La Huesuda, La Calavera, La Pelona. She has so many names. The bald one, the skinny one, but everybody knows who she is. And so she has a considerable following still in Mexico. And she loves also the marginalized. She loves criminals. She takes care of all of those people who have been rejected by society. And I interviewed a young guy, and he was wearing one of her medallions. And I said, well, why do you worship her? And he says, oh, I'm a drug dealer. How can I ask the Lady of Guadalupe to help me smuggle drugs? Bad people need something to pray to too. So, you know, she provides, and so that's like the old version of Day of the Dead in the Americas. And it has been incorporated into the church, but it is universal. All over the world at the same time, the same ceremony is observed according to the differences of the cultures involved.
This would be, in my experience, the famous dancer, Cleo Parker Robinson, brings the same thing from Africa, and they call it a transitioning to just a different mode of existence. While the filming of Apocalypse Now happened in the Philippines, Eleanor Coppola wrote about how the ceremonies were happening there in the same way that you're speaking of. My good friend, Roberta Chambers, who lives right there in Taos, her brother is on the border of Spain to France. They live right there. And this is a big thing in the culture as well. So you're correct in saying how universal, how that each culture that remains with some indigenous feeling, something that came from the heart, from the psyche, we are retaining that. And it's a wonderful thing to look back on. So I'm thrilled that you mentioned how early this happened in grassroots. And which brings me to a question. Stephen, this comes for you, because you talk about how your pottery has appropriated, if you will, the iconography of Days of the Dead. And yet this is something that happens in all these different cultures. So we don't think that you've done something wrong. We think that you've expanded. Tell us about how you decided to choose these things, of course, among others in your pottery.
Yeah, you know, I was aware of the Day of the Dead. I've spent not as much time as Anita in Mexico, but I've never been there for the Day of the Dead. I've been in Italy for the Day of the Dead. But never Mexico. I've always got an open studio that happens the first week of November, the first weekend of November. So I've never been to Mexico for the Day of the Dead. But back in the 80s, somebody was telling me that another potter had put skulls on their pots, and I thought, boy, that's a dumb idea, because I was thinking of cow skulls. And then when I found out that she was doing cow skulls, so then I just started doing skeletons. And so I do them mainly they're just dancing skeletons with chilies. And I know that the Day of the Dead isn't really a biggie, at least in my time here in New Mexico. It doesn't seem to be a local thing so much. It does seem to be more of a Mexican thing. But I've made the pattern for 35 years, maybe. And, you know, I enjoy it, and it seems to work. And you know, like I say, I'm not Hispanic. I'm a lot of other things, but not Hispanic.
Well,
So,
one of the reasons that I loved your pottery from way back, and I must have one of the star plate skeletons that I probably bought, gosh, maybe 30 years ago.
mhm, mhm,
On in your experience, but you also use other iconography, if you will,
mhm.
the proper Father Bill's term, popular symbols from the culture of New Mexico and our what we say our melded society of all these different people from the Pueblo people, the other indigenous tribes, the trappers who came, the Mexicans, the Anglos, the artists, the people from Los Alamos. I mean, this is a mixed bag, and that's why I think your things are really so wonderful, which brings me to a thought, actually for Father Bill. When in many of the icons that you have created now, I see multiple different symbols that come from contemporary life. So your icons don't look like old Russian or old Greek things. They have a relevance, like Stephen's way that he has interpreted these symbols. And won't you tell us a little bit how you come to decide how you're melding times and cultures?
Sure. I want to first say, would you please say hello to Cleo Parker Robinson for me? I grew up in Denver, and I taught high school there too. And I was asked to choreograph the musicals for the high school kids. So I went to take dance from her when I was 24. And her husband taught at Regis too. So please tell her hello for me, okay?
One of their great friends was my early piano teacher, who also imported artwork from Mexico, had his studio in Guadalajara, and they were friends of my parents. So it's a short world.
Yeah, it really is. There's
Love it. Please.
Yeah,
please
just listening to everybody, you know, I mean, this is, like Anita said, this is so ancient and goes way back to, you know, way before Christ. People this time of year felt like she said that the year was dying, and that's really where the Samhain came from, the Celtic feast of the Celtic time of year, you know, when you honor the dead. But when I was living in New York, I was working 1983 to 1990. In 83, I began working at the AIDS hospice in Manhattan at St. Vincent's Hospital. So I was working with the dying all the time from 83 to 90. And there was no cure and there was no vaccine or anything. So that was my preparation to become an iconographer. And at the end of 1990, my superiors, I was a Jesuit at the time, and they said, you can't keep doing this, you have to do something else. And is there anything that you want to do? And I had so much power, they would have let me do anything, but I always thought, well, if I do something, I have to work. So I said, well, I've always wanted to work with a master. And that was my idea of an artist, you know, during the time of the Renaissance or even medieval times. People would be an apprentice to somebody else and learn. And I had been to Santa Fe and seen the reredos in the cathedral, which has icons by my teacher, Robert Lentz, and now he's a Franciscan friar. And when I saw them, I thought, now this is the person that I feel is the most important in Catholic religious art. This would have been maybe 84, 85. And so when they told me I had to leave New York and do something else, I asked Robert if I could become an apprentice. And he said, yeah, but you have to move to Albuquerque. So on September 7th, 1990, I arrived in Albuquerque and began studying with him. It lasted for 6 years. I had lessons 3 times a week. And if you told me before what was going to happen, I probably would not have done it, because it involves Orthodox theology, as you mentioned, Russian and Greek theology, and it's a whole different world. It's different than the Catholic world, very different. So I had to become more of the mind of an Orthodox, and I used to go to an Orthodox church here in Albuquerque every Sunday to kind of drink in, the atmosphere. And there wasn't a space on the wall that didn't have an icon on. They were just covered with icons. And so I began, and I began by copying old icons. And then I would get a commission to do somebody. Let's take, for example, Dorothy Sang, the nun that was murdered in the rainforest for, trying to stand up for the people there, but also for the ecological, situation of the rainforest. And they shot her February 12th. I think it was 2010 maybe. Anyway, I got a commission to do her. So if you're doing somebody contemporary, you have nothing to work with except to photograph. So I worked with her, and then one of the things I was asked to do, and this is the day, oddly enough, October 7th, I was asked to do an image of Matthew Shepard, who was the gay boy that was hung on the deer fence October 7th, 1998, tonight. So tonight is the beginning of his passion. And I was asked to do an image of him. And so I created an image of him with a large moon, because in Catholic symbolism, Mary is the moon and Christ is the sun. She's the reflected light of her own son. So his mother had said in an article I read, she said, I hope he didn't die alone. So I put this large moon there so that his mother would see that Mary was there, on that night. So I get involved with different people, and I love copying the old ones. I mean, I really do. I have, let me show you a picture here. I don't know if you can see it, but that is a female angel that, can you see it, or is it?
Oh, it's good.
We can see it a little bit.
It's called Jesus Christ, Holy Silence. And when I saw that, I said, we're not in Kansas anymore, I mean, I really was shocked. The Orthodox have this whole thing with Sophia, the feminine. And Sophia, of course, is female in all of the wisdom books in the Bible. So, I got deeper and deeper into that whole theology. I'll stop right there.
I'm going
that
to
was
put up
wonderful.
a background, Father Bill, of your All Souls.
Oh,
You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I did that in Taos, I lived in Taos for 14 years, and I don't think there's any place that's home to me like Taos. I still, every time I come back up there, I still feel it. It is such an intense and beautiful place. So the priest in Denver that was, knew my mom and my dad and my family, he became pastor of All Souls Church in Denver. And he contacted me and he said, we need an image for All Souls. So that quote from Wisdom, the souls of the just are in the hands of God, that we use that for almost every funeral. And that's Wisdom chapter 3. And I wanted, figures kind of in the air, almost dancing in the air. And I remembered that when I was in my 20s, did I just disappear?
Yeah, I think it's just your device.
Okay.
It's okay. We can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know how to fix it. Let me see.
It might be the
Okay.
bandwidth wherever you're located.
Well, if I can.
Anyway, oh, yeah. So I remembered reading The Prophet by Khalil Gibran, and I remembered that he had these figures, these naked people, like hanging in the skylight. And so I went back to that book and used some of those figures and then I took a picture of my own hands and, had that in there.
If I can comment at this point,
Sure.
your things have a very quiet, very deep symbolism that we need to keep looking, and we get further into the layers of what you have said. Now, referring to the picture behind me from the town of Sinsunsan in Mexico, do you see the extraordinary, the extravagance, the floral, the brightness that is typical of the ceremonies in the graveyard? That's something we don't really know here, that's not a New Mexico thing. That's more of a Mexican thing with the. And so that brings me to Anita. Your work has all these elements in it that are colorful, bright, symbolic, as well as of course our Stevens items in his pottery, which are more graphic. But Anita, so many of your things, I would call them altarpieces, and I'm sure you too. And give us some more idea about where you get all these tiny little details that you put into your paintings.
Well, the Camposantos, or the cemeteries of New Mexico are brilliantly colorful, and every grave is a story, a deep, heart-rending story. I love to visit them and take photographs. But to tell you the truth, and I think Father Bill will relate to this especially, I began painting skeletons after I had a near-death experience. And I learned from that experience that life is eternal and that there is no death. So there is no esoteric hidden secret in my paintings, because my skeletons are very much alive. They're dancing and playing guitars and making love and eating and, driving around in their lowriders and so on. And then they're so beautiful. I mean, what an incredible piece of engineering. I can understand why Steve can't resist drawing skeletons. They're exquisite pieces of engineering. I mean, there are 23 bones in my hand, this marvelous instrument that can do all this stuff. And so that's one of the reasons why the skeletons appear in my work. And then I'm of Mexican descent, and the skeleton has been in Mexican art since pre-Columbian times. From the architecture, every artist has got to paint a skeleton. And so the colors in the sunlight of New Mexico, all colors are brilliant. And I just love color. And then I like to refer to what Jung said, which is so true, is that the unconscious mind responds to color. It actually bypasses the art critic and the intellect, and responds from the belly. But I have a question for Father Bill about icons. His process, you described the way you put together that piece, is so much like mine, because I paint sometimes for healers, sometimes for spiritual people, a painting that they might give me a list of 10 things they want in the painting, and sometimes I don't even know what they mean. My job is just to make it beautiful. But there's a connection between the ofrenda and the icon. The ofrendas of Mexico, for instance, are hung in central Mexico all over the church walls. Let's say I go and I pray to a certain saint for a favor, and the favor is granted. So I'll get a little piece of tin, maybe 5 by 7. And even though I'm not a painter, I will paint a picture of myself receiving the gift that I begged for from the saint. Maybe the saint visited me in my hospital bed or something like that. And so those are the ofrendas, which are like visual prayers. And then they evolved into a kind of an interactive piece of spiritual art. And I do those too. And the painting behind Karen is one of those. It has a shelf, and you can put flowers on the shelf, or a candle, or a rosary, or a found object. And in that way you communicate with the spirit of the saint that is represented.
Mm-hmm.
That's very,
So they're very close. They're both like spiritual acts, and creativity is the opposite of destruction, Father. It's like the antidote to violence.
Yeah, I always say it's so easy to criticize and it's so hard to create.
Yeah.
And it's so hard to keep an open heart, a loving heart, and to keep creating. And, the critics are just of anything. It's so easy to do that. It's so easy to be negative. And it's so difficult to keep going. And it does touch your heart when you paint. I can tell.
Oh.
When we were in that lowrider show together, do you remember that?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that was not too long ago. It doesn't seem like, maybe
It was about 5 years ago, Father.
5 years ago. Yeah, so that's not too long to me. But
that building is not the same anymore.
Oh, okay. But no, your point is that they're very much the same. Yeah, they are. When I was at the Ranchos Church, being on the altar, I could see Antonio Moeno's Reredos off, and I would sit and stare at it because he did so much with so little. Like he just has one line with a little thing in the middle for the mouth, and it's so beautiful. It's utterly beautiful. I never tired of looking at it, and I wanted, I was thinking when I first started, I wanted to do retablos. I really did not want to do icons because when I was in art school, I didn't really like icons at all. I thought they were too stiff. My dad used to say, "How come those babies are so old? What are you doing those old babies for?" He'd always tease me about it. And funny looking Marys, and so I thought, I didn't really understand it. I would much more, like a lot of the the painters like Fra Angelico or Tiepolo or something like that. But once I realized that they were symbols, it's a symbol of Christ, and you can pray with it easier because it's really not what Christ looked like. And that Mary did not wear the Byzantine kind of shower cap, and then the all that. Mary was a Jewish woman, so of that time. But there's something about the like Moeno, there's something about doing a symbol of something that allows you to put anything you want into it. You can put your Mary into it or your Christ into it, because that's not really, when you do a painting of Christ, like Caravaggio or something, then you're really trying to tell people, this is what I think of it, So symbols have always been I've always loved symbols. And when I was a little kid, I knew every symbol of every saint. St. Agnes is the lamb, and St. Lucy has eyes on a plate, and all the different ones, because I just loved it. And I would spend my time in church. I don't remember a single thing except for looking at the windows, you know.
What you're
So,
saying is how many of these things are a very personal, very grassroots a approach to a religious devotion. And coming back to the idea of the ofrenda or altar for this time of year. And that also speaks to what Anita was just saying about how it's little creations, tiny little things that each individual does. It does not have to be a great work of art. It's the things that people that you're honoring love during their life on earth where we see them. And we're welcoming them back to think of this. And it's not that far difference to what we see, for instance, in Bali with the Hindu people who daily have their little altar and they make little flower things and little, almost an origami type of holder for a tiny seed, a bit of rice, something that is so personal, so everyday that we hardly, in our fast world, we don't even get a chance to enjoy what that devotion means exactly. And that brings me to Stephen again, thinking of how you've put your symbols, your icons on the plates that people would use on a daily basis. Do people ever tell you how they think of New Mexico and as they maybe eat off of your dishes, that it brings?
Oh, I think definitely. I guess hearing everybody talk, I guess I'm a secular artist here, and I'm just interested in images and not maybe what these are conveying. You know, people will take what they want from them. But definitely, I think I've played on New Mexico themes. You know, I moved to Santa Fe 49 years ago. I was born in Detroit and grew up there and in Ohio. So I've appropriated the imagery, and I think I'm part of the place too. I mean, I've had my studio in Pilar for, I don't know, 43 years. I lived in Santa Fe before that. I live in Taos now, but I'm image driven, I guess. And I have, at one point, I employed 12 people and we sold all over the country and sold Day of the Dead imagery all over the country. We started to sell in Europe a little bit, and then I decided to kind of shut it all down. And now I just work by myself with, I have one employee right now. But I don't attach a lot of religion to my work. I think the images of death, it's like an old man explained to me in Pilar years ago, there's that M in your hand and it's for muerte, and it's always there. And so I guess that's how I deal with it, is that that someday I'll be a skeleton, and that'll be it. But my pots will last forever. So, you know, when everything is said and done, that's my legacy. You won't get rid of what I've made.
That's totally
literally.
You know, Father, symbols are crucibles that hold things that are too big for words.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The symbol is so much bigger than all the words.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I like them.
One thing about Stephen's work that we haven't talked about is bringing sound into the celebration. The skeleton clack their bones. The Stephen skeletons are playing guitar, they're mariachis, they play the drums, they sing. And in of course, that's a big deal in Mexico, is when you go to the graveyard and you've cleaned your graves of your families, you hire a band to come and play the favorite song of your loved one, your mother, whoever it is you're honoring on that time. And I think that when we think of icons, we always think of chanting in the church. And I'm sure, Anita, your religious pieces, which I call them religious because they are to me, you hear things from out the void that you can actually sense what's going on in your paintings.
I've tried to paint music often. I paint dancers all the time, and the landscape around them, the floor under their feet, ripple and move with the power of their dance. So I do try and incorporate sound into the paintings.
And in the great panel behind you, we have things that are ultimately New Mexico sounds, the great storms that when they actually blow in, they are crashing, and these heavens are opening up with great rain, and the thundering of the hooves of the horses out in the field, whether they are mavericks or whether they are Indian ponies. So you've got it right here, just in what you're showing us.
And then it's layered with symbols, because children are leading this procession of people as they rush with the water down the arroyo. And children were particularly, I'm thinking of the god Tlaloc, you know, the pre-Columbian god Tlaloc, who was the god of water, and his association with children, which is very sad, but part of history, because he demanded enormous sacrifices of children. But before we look down our noses at the Aztec, let's not forget the children that we sacrifice, you know, so we can't hold our noses up in the air. But yes, you know, you can hear the horses splashing through the water and the arroyos rushing with the roar of water.
And one of the things that is so wonderful in Mexico, I'll move away so you can see this picture of kids suddenly becoming part of their culture, because this is a fun time. This in an elementary school, and kids suddenly with play, they are understanding things about their culture, about their religion, about their families. And the way that this passes on, to me, is just extraordinary, something that I never was able to experience as a child. And so I'm fascinated myself, wanting to participate and be part of their joy. And then, of course, of this transitional mode that we're all talking about, this very different attitude toward death that I think all of us share, that this is a transitional mode. It's simply something different. Miss Karen, I think that our time is.
We are getting towards the end and ready for some Q&A. So I'm watching the chat, and I'm not seeing any questions come in yet, but I just want to say, just listening to everybody, I so appreciate, and the museum is honored for these artists to have participated in this conversation. And since it is our first in this series, I'm sure that we'll be able to improve it going forward. One of the things that has struck me listening to everybody is really how beautiful it is to add to the conversations, the narratives that are happening, particular to go back to the ideas about cultural appropriation. Because what I see in the museum is, you know, it seems like people have questions when they see some of the for example, retablos, the religious iconography, the death carts, the skeletons. And I love what Anita kind of puts out there, that, you know, skeleton is a universal symbol. Everybody can connect to that. We all have a skeleton. And people will ask questions, and it's somewhat reassuring, it seems, to always be able to say, well, you know, in the Hispano culture, death is not to be hidden. And so it's part of life. So to be able to share, and then especially young people will embrace that. And so in terms of the narratives about cultural appropriation, I think as artists, as museums, as cultural institutions, we can help to ease those conversations, affirm for people that sharing happens. And as we said in the practice session, artists riff on each other's work all the time. And it is a conversation. So it's okay, because I think a lot of people are afraid that they are going to be appropriating somebody else's culture.
Can I speak to that?
Yes, please.
There is such a thing as a cultural appropriation, and it is very damaging, and it hurts, you know, and like I say, it's not easy to make that distinction, but I think that one of the ways in which we can measure whether something is being appropriated improperly or not is the distribution of power.
Yeah.
If I am a white man and I have education and I have capital and I am able to invest and I have education and I have technical skills and I appropriate something from another culture of people who are poor and have nothing, and I take something from, let's say, a spiritual practice, and I publicize it and I make money off of it, that is appropriation. So it's a difference of power.
I think
We exchange something with each other equally, on an equal basis, and I give you something that is of appropriate and equivalent value, then it's an exchange. But if I am more powerful than you are, and I can take what you give me and make a lot out of it, and you can't, then it is cultural appropriation.
That's very well said. And I
yeah.
that I've always had a little challenge in that regard, because our family are from all over the world. They're every possible different thing you can think of. And so I've got a little bit from here and a little bit from there. And I try to say, I honor people from my group by building on what they have shared with me so graciously, and then try to create something new out of it. So it is a fine line.
It is a fine line. And I have, for instance, my sister wife lives in, or is from Oaxaca, and her family practice their traditional Day of the Dead ceremonies all the time. And they find that the press of tourists is so heavy and so oppressive that they can't even finish their ceremonies because they have completely lost their cultural privacy. So, you know, it's not black and white.
Right.
Well,
No,
I think in Taos, we talk a lot about people coming and raising the prices of everything. I was born in Detroit. Detroit doesn't have that problem. So, you know, it used to be the 5th largest city in the United States, and it's lost 2/3 of its population now. So I always wonder, you know, for me, it's like, wow, Detroit wishes they had this problem, which is kind of cultural appropriation, I think, where people were coming in, were living in adobe houses, were, you know, acting like we're farmers. And
we have a question because I want to make sure we get questions from the audience. And the question that has come in, well, first of all, people are thanking you for, you know, this discussion and how interesting these perspectives are. But can panelists speak about the history of sugar skulls and say something also about the symbolism of the marigolds?
I'll speak to the marigolds. They're called cempasúchil in Nahuatl, And the marigolds have a preservative quality in them, the dried marigolds. They can be used to preserve things, and were buried with the dead. And I don't know the origin of the sugar skulls. Maybe Sarah does.
Well, I think it is speaking from my lady friends here at the Cultural Museum, and when they lead children's groups through making sugar skulls, it seems as though, because everyone had calacas, they had the calaveras, and they were made out of all different things, but the kids liked the sugar, and that was a sweet thing, something that all that the children could actually do, and the decorating of them. And that's how the maestras at the museum here speak of the sugar skulls. More than that, I do not know, but of course I keep mine and I buy new ones whenever I can find them. And of course, you're supposed to put the name of the individual you are honoring onto the skull.
Mm-hmm.
And now, of course, I have seen little dogs and little cats and even fish, sometimes in the marketplaces, as though you are honoring your pet who passed on to the next life.
So excuse, I'm going to apologize ahead of time because if this is offensive at all, but I'm wondering, because it's not meant to be, I'm wondering, Sarah, as I'm hearing you talk about that, if the sugar skulls are a newer aspect and is part of somewhat of the secularization of Dia de los Muertos as the
You have all of these. You have the Jose Posada,
right.
and that's way back. That'd be 100 years ago, where he started drawing them, and those have become pottery and paper mache, and they're of course the great Mexican artists who do sculpture after the Katrina and her male escort. Those are all newish things, and yet they're built on those original symbols. And see, I think that that's quite marvelous, because each person has an interpretation that gives us a new angle, a new way of thinking about the symbols. And to me, that's what art is all about.
Well, I was reading an article by on the New Mexico Humanities Council website about Dia de los Muertos, and the reason that's part of why I asked, because that article was expressing a sort of an expansion of the shared culture, and the author was actually asserting that Halloween is becoming more popular in Mexico at the same time that Dia de los Muertos is becoming more popular in the United States. And so, there might be some sharing going on now in contemporary times that is expanding the understanding and the meaning. And so I don't know if some people view that as connecting it to Halloween. It might be, I think, it's a living culture, it's a living interpretation, it's a living narrative. So maybe
in times when we participated on the vigils, on the all-night vigils in the state of Morelia, very often young children run around with a watermelon or a big gourd that is carved like a jack-o'-lantern, and they're looking for treats and little money from people. And so, yes, that's fairly common. And then here, quite often, even many of our neighbors here in Colorado, they will have displays, not just Halloween, but will have something of Days of the Dead, as we have. I have a very large that I have decorated and I put out at that time.
I mean, could it also be have some childlike simplicity in that just like life is sweet, death is sweet, you put your loved ones, name on that skull. It's not to be feared. Could be some of that as well.
Well, food is made in the shape like pan del muerto.
Mhm,
A lot of food is made in the shape of skeletons for Day of the Dead.
mhm.
And you eat them. And, this is reminiscent once again of Mexico's ancient past, because you know what they did with the sacrifices and what the original recipe for pozole was.
Mhm.
Well, yes, you always have pan de muertos, as bones or sometimes little figurines. And so naturally here, we head immediately to the Mexican grocery stores to get those things. And of course, they're always sweet. And Anita is correct. So many times on the altars, on the ofrendas, things are sweet. And not to mention beer and booze. And so
Yeah, my ancestors, when I build an altar to them, they don't care about the food.
Mhm.
They just want the booze.
There you go. Well, we've got about 4 minutes left, so I want to wrap it up. And again, I want to thank Anita and Stephen and Father Bill for joining Sara and I for this inaugural, event of Millicent Unplugged. And we certainly hope to continue it through 2022. And I appreciate you giving your time to share and talk about this. I also want to let our audience know that the website, so Stephen's website is kilbornpottery.com. You can find out more about Stephen on his website, as well as order his wonderful pottery. Anita's website is anitarodriguez.com. She's got a beautiful website that starts out with, "Hi, I'm Anita, I'm a painter." I love the simplicity of that. And then, of course, William Hart McNichols, and I'm sorry, Father Bill, I left out the last name, nerves of opening night, right? So, so it's Father Bill, Fr. Bill McNichols -sacredimages.com. And I will put this in the chat. You can also email me at karen@millicentrogers.org if you have any questions or want to request the website information. And I also would like to just put a plug in for next month, because Sara and I are planning to do this monthly, first Thursdays. And next month, we are going to be welcoming artists and gallery owners Max Jones and Tony Walker and author Peter Heller, as we have an homage to artist Jim Wagner, and we're calling that Hippie Cool to Hip Waiters. It's going to be friends just telling stories, and we hope that you'll join us. So I'm going to go ahead and end this meeting. Thank you so much. Any last thoughts, Sara?
Oh, I just want to say thank you, panelists. You have been quite marvelous. And Anita, we must have you back next year to talk about the Tarot. And
yes, we didn't have enough time, did we?
And so there's many more things to come, and we hope this will be not just all the 12 virtual panels we have designed for this year. We wanted to go for next year and the next, and it to be our legacy.
And for everybody to know, Stephen is waiting to become a new grandpa again. So he's actually at his daughter's house doing this webinar, and we were hoping the baby wasn't going to come during the webinar. And I don't think it did it?
It didn't.
No.
But I'm here to take care of the 2-year-old who needs to be taken care of, so the dad and the mother can go to the hospital. But I may not make it to see the baby this trip. We'll see. We'll see. Any day, any minute.
Play the baby in.
Well, thank you and
Thank you for
good
putting this
night.
together.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Good night.
Good
Thank you.
night.
Good night.